The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stone walls of Windsor Castle as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, but she hardly recognized the woman looking back. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her usually radiant skin appeared pale and drawn. The weight of recent months had taken its toll, not just on her body, but on her soul. Outside, the grounds were bustling with activity. Gardeners tended to the immaculate lawns, security personnel made their rounds, and staff members hurried about their daily duties. Life continued as normal for everyone else, but for Catherine, nothing felt normal anymore. The diagnosis had changed everything. She pressed her palm against the cool window pane and closed her eyes. The memory of that day in the doctor's office was still fresh and painful. She had gone in for what she thought was a routine checkup, perhaps expecting to discuss the minor fatigue she had been experiencing. Instead, she found herself sitting across from a specialist who spoke in measured, careful tones about treatment options and prognosis. The word cancer had hung in the air like a dark cloud, changing the very atmosphere of the room. Catherine remembered how the world seemed to tilt on its axis in that moment. She had gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles turning white as she processed the information. The doctor's voice had become distant and muffled, as if she were hearing him from underwater. But it was not just her own reaction that haunted her. It was the look on William's face when she told him. She had waited until they were alone in their private study at Adelaide Cottage, their children safely tucked into bed. The fire had been crackling in the grate, casting warm light across the familiar room filled with family photographs and personal mementos. William had been reading through some official documents when she entered the room. He looked up with that gentle smile that had first captured her heart all those years ago at university. "How did the appointment go?" he had asked casually, not suspecting that her answer would shatter their world. "William, we need to talk," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something in her tone made him immediately set aside his papers and give her his full attention. He patted the sofa beside him, but Catherine remained standing. She needed to maintain some distance for this conversation, needed to stay strong. "The tests came back," she began, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "It's not what we hoped." The color drained from William's face as understanding dawned. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Catherine watched as her husband, the future king of England, a man trained from birth to handle any crisis, struggled to process what she was telling him. "How long have you known?" he finally managed to ask. "Just since this morning. I wanted to tell you right away, but I needed time to think about how to explain it to the children." William stood up then, closing the distance between them in 2 quick strides. He reached for her, but she stepped back slightly. She could see the hurt in his eyes at her withdrawal, but she needed to get through this conversation without breaking down completely. "What did the doctor say about treatment?" William asked, his voice steady despite the fear she could see in his eyes. Catherine launched into the medical details, explaining the treatment plan and the timeline. She spoke clinically, as if discussing someone else's diagnosis rather than her own. It was the only way she could get through it without collapsing under the weight of her emotions. As she spoke, William listened intently, occasionally asking questions or seeking clarification. But she could see him retreating emotionally, building up the walls that he had learned to construct during times of crisis. It was a defense mechanism she recognized, one that had served the royal family well during public scandals and personal tragedies. When she finished explaining, silence fell between them. The fire continued to crackle, and somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed the hour. Normal sounds of a normal evening, except nothing about this was normal. "We'll get through this," William said finally, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "We'll have the best doctors, the best treatment. Money is no object." Catherine nodded, appreciating his immediate shift into problem-solving mode, even as she felt a strange distance opening up between them. She understood that this was how he coped with overwhelming situations, but part of her longed for him to simply hold her and let them both acknowledge the fear they were feeling. "What about the children?" she asked. "How do we tell them?" This question seemed to crack William's composed facade slightly. The thought of explaining to George, Charlotte, and Louis that their mother was seriously ill visibly shook him. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Catherine recognized as a sign of his inner turmoil. "We'll tell them together," he said after a moment. "We'll make sure they understand that we're going to fight this, and that they're going to be okay no matter what happens." The phrase, "no matter what happens," hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Catherine appreciated William's determination to shield their children from the full weight of the situation, but she also worried about how they would maintain that protective facade while dealing with their own fears and grief. Over the following days, they fell into a strange new routine. On the surface, life continued much as it always had. They attended official engagements, reviewed their schedules with their private secretaries, and maintained their public appearances. But, underneath, they were both struggling with the new reality of Catherine's illness. Catherine noticed how William began to watch her constantly when he thought she wasn't looking. She would catch him studying her face for signs of fatigue or pain, monitoring her appetite at meals, and hovering protectively whenever she seemed even slightly unwell. His concern was touching, but also suffocating. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself pulling away emotionally. It was not intentional, but she felt the need to process her diagnosis privately. She spent long hours walking the grounds of their estate, thinking about her mortality and what it might mean for her children's future. She began writing letters to each of her children, to be opened on significant occasions if she was no longer there to witness them herself. The emotional distance between them grew gradually. They still shared the same bed, still maintained their public persona as a loving couple, but there was an invisible barrier between them that neither seemed able to cross. They spoke about practical matters, medical appointments, and schedule adjustments, but they stopped talking about their fears, their hopes, and their love for each other. One evening, about 2 weeks after the diagnosis, Catherine was in their bedroom when William entered. She was sitting at her dressing table, removing her jewelry after a particularly exhausting day of engagements. The effort of maintaining her composure in public was becoming increasingly difficult. "You look tired today," William observed, loosening his tie. "I am tired," Catherine replied simply. "Maybe we should cancel tomorrow's engagement. No one would question it if we said you had a minor illness." Catherine met his eyes in the mirror. "I'm not ready to start canceling things yet. People will ask questions. Your health is more important than public appearances." "Is it?" Catherine asked, turning to face him. "Because sometimes I wonder if you see me as Catherine, your wife, or as the Princess of Wales who happens to be ill." The question clearly caught William off guard. He paused in the act of removing his cufflinks, his expression confused and slightly hurt. "What do you mean by that?" Catherine sighed. Realizing she had opened a door she was not sure she was ready to walk through. But the words had been spoken, and there was no taking them back. "Ever since the diagnosis, you've been so focused on managing the situation. You've talked to the doctors, reviewed treatment options, considered the impact on our schedule. You've been the perfect royal consort, handling a crisis with grace and efficiency. But you haven't been my husband." William finished removing his cufflinks and set them carefully on the dresser before responding. When he spoke, his voice was measured and controlled. "I'm trying to take care of you and our family. I'm trying to make sure you get the best possible care and that our children are protected from unnecessary worry. I thought that's what you needed from me." "What I need," Catherine said, standing up from the dressing table, "is for my husband to be scared with me, to be angry with me, to cry with me. I need you to stop being so damn composed and just be human for 5 minutes." The words came out more harshly than she had intended, but she did not regret them. She had been carrying her emotions alone for too long, and the isolation was becoming unbearable. William stared at her for a long moment, and Catherine could see the battle playing out behind his eyes. His training, his upbringing, everything he had been taught about duty and composure warred against his love for his wife, and his own deep-seated fears about losing her. "I can't fall apart," he said finally. "If I fall apart, who's going to hold everything together? I'm not asking you to fall apart. I'm asking you to feel something other than dutiful concern. You think I don't feel anything?" William's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composure she had seen since that first night. "You think this hasn't been tearing me apart inside? You think I sleep at night? You think I don't lie awake watching you breathe and wondering if this might be one of our last conversations?" The rawness in his voice stopped Catherine cold. She had been so focused on his outward composure that she had not fully considered what he might be going through internally. "Then, why don't you talk to me about it?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Because talking about it makes it real," William admitted. "As long as we're focused on treatments and schedules and managing the situation, I can pretend this is just another challenge we need to overcome. But if we start talking about what we're really afraid of..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but Catherine understood. They were both terrified of giving voice to their worst fears, as if speaking them aloud might somehow make them more likely to come true. She crossed the room and took his hands in hers. For the first time since the diagnosis, she saw her husband's carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. His eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for weeks. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "I can't lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to do any of this without you." "You won't have to," Catherine said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. They held each other then, finally, allowing themselves to acknowledge the fear and pain they had both been carrying. For the first time since the diagnosis, Catherine felt like she had her husband back, even if it was only for this moment. But even as they clung to each other, Catherine could feel something shifting between them. The diagnosis had changed them, individually and as a couple. They were no longer the same people who had fallen in love at university, who had navigated the challenges of royal life together, who had built a family and a future based on the assumption that they would have decades together. Now they were two people facing an uncertain future, trying to love each other while simultaneously preparing for the possibility of goodbye. And Catherine was beginning to realize that this preparation might require them to start letting go of each other, even while they still had time left together. The thought was almost unbearable, but it was also undeniably present in both of their minds. How do you love someone fully when you know that time might be running out? How do you live normally when every day might be precious? And how do you protect your children from the reality of loss while also preparing them for the possibility of a very different future? These questions would haunt them both in the days to come, as they struggled to balance hope with realism, love with preparation, and the demands of public life with the private battle they were fighting. The diagnosis had not just threatened Catherine's life. It had fundamentally altered their relationship, setting them on a path toward a goodbye that neither of them wanted to contemplate, but both knew they might have to face. As they stood together in their bedroom, holding each other in the lamplight, both William and Catherine understood that they were at the beginning of the most difficult journey of their lives. They did not yet know how it would end, but they were starting to understand that the process of facing it would change them both in ways they could not yet imagine. The silence between them was no longer empty or distant. It was full of all the words they could not yet speak, all the fears they were not ready to voice, and all the love they were trying to hold on to while learning how to let go. It was the beginning of their silent goodbye, though neither of them was ready to acknowledge it as such. Outside their window, the world continued to turn. The seasons would change, their children would grow, and life would move forward regardless of what happened to them. But inside this room, time seemed suspended as they grappled with the reality that their love story might have an ending they had never planned for. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy between them, and Catherine realized that this might be how their goodbye would unfold, not in dramatic declarations or tear-filled speeches, but in the gradual accumulation of moments like this one, where they held each other close while slowly learning to let go. The chemotherapy treatments began on a crisp October morning. Catherine had chosen to receive her treatment at a private medical facility in London, away from the public eye and media speculation. William drove her to the first appointment himself, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as they navigated through the early morning traffic. They barely spoke during the 45-minute drive. Catherine stared out the passenger window, watching ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. A woman walking her dog, a man buying coffee from a street vendor, children waiting at a bus stop with their school bags. She envied their normalcy, their assumption that tomorrow would be much like today. "We don't have to do this," William said suddenly, breaking the silence as they approached the medical center. "We could get a second opinion, try a different approach." Catherine turned to look at her husband. His jaw was set in that determined way she knew well, the expression he wore when he was trying to control an uncontrollable situation. She reached over and placed her hand on his arm. "We've already gotten 3 opinions," she reminded him gently. "They all say the same thing." William pulled into the parking space reserved for them and turned off the engine. For a moment, they sat in silence, both staring at the unassuming building that would become such a significant part of their lives over the coming months. "I should be going through this with you," William said, his voice barely audible. "You are going through this with me." "No, I mean really going through it. If it were me, you'd be right there beside me every step of the way. But because of who I am, because of my position, I can't be there the way you need me to be." Catherine understood what he meant. William's public role made it nearly impossible for him to accompany her to every treatment without drawing unwanted attention. They had agreed that it was better for him to maintain his normal schedule as much as possible, both to protect their privacy and to provide some stability for their children. "You're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters." The treatment itself was both better and worse than Catherine had expected. The medical staff was exceptionally kind and professional, treating her with the same dignity they would offer any patient while being mindful of her unique circumstances. But the physical sensation of the chemicals flowing through her body was deeply unsettling. She had brought a book to read, but found herself unable to concentrate on the words. Instead, she watched the 4 bags slowly empty and tried not to think about what the medication was doing inside her body. The irony was not lost on her that in order to save her life, they had to poison her system and hope that the cancer died before she did. William had stayed for the first hour, holding her hand and making awkward small talk about the children's school activities and upcoming royal engagements. But Catherine could see how difficult it was for him to sit there feeling helpless, so she encouraged him to leave for a meeting he had scheduled. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "It's just sitting here for a few hours. Nothing dramatic." After William left, Catherine found herself relaxing slightly. She did not have to maintain any facade or worry about his emotional state. She could simply focus on getting through the treatment. The nurse assigned to her, a middle-aged woman named Margaret, was wonderfully matter-of-fact about the entire process. She checked Catherine's vital signs regularly, adjusted the flow when needed, and engaged in comfortable conversation that had nothing to do with royal duties or public expectations. "My daughter's about your age," Margaret mentioned as she checked Catherine's blood pressure. "She went through this same treatment 2 years ago. Breast cancer. She's doing wonderfully now." Catherine appreciated the normalcy of the conversation and the hope implicit in Margaret's words. It reminded her that she was not the first person to sit in this chair, and she would not be the last. Cancer did not discriminate based on titles or social position. When the treatment was finished, Catherine felt surprisingly normal. She had expected to feel immediately sick or weak, but the side effects would take time to manifest. William was waiting in the car when she emerged, having canceled his afternoon appointments to drive her home. "How do you feel?" he asked as she settled into the passenger seat. "Like I just spent 4 hours in a medical facility having poison pumped into my body," Catherine replied with a weak smile. "But otherwise fine." William did not return her smile. He had been hoping, she realized, for reassurance that this would not be as difficult as they had feared. Her honest answer reminded him that they were just beginning a long and challenging journey. The side effects began to manifest over the following days. The fatigue was the worst part initially. Catherine, who had always been energetic and active, found herself exhausted by simple tasks that had never required any thought. Playing with the children in the garden left her breathless. Climbing the stairs to their bedroom felt like running a marathon. But it was the nausea that finally broke her composure. 3 days after her first treatment, she woke up feeling violently ill. She barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting, and William found her there 20 minutes later, sitting on the cold tile floor with her head in her hands. "Why didn't you call for me?" he asked, immediately kneeling beside her. "I thought it would pass," Catherine mumbled, not lifting her head. William helped her back to bed and brought her water and crackers. He sat beside her, stroking her hair as she tried to keep down small sips of water. For the first time since the diagnosis, Catherine felt truly vulnerable and dependent. "I hate this," she whispered. "I know. I hate being weak. I hate that our children might see me like this. I hate that you have to take care of me like I'm an invalid." "You're not weak," William said firmly. "You're the strongest person I know, and taking care of you isn't a burden. It's a privilege." Despite his supportive words, Catherine could see the strain beginning to show on William's face. He was trying to maintain his normal schedule while also being available for her and the children. He was managing media inquiries about her reduced public appearances while trying to shield their family from speculation. He was researching treatment options and second-guessing medical decisions while projecting confidence and optimism. The pressure was enormous, and Catherine could see it wearing on him. He had lost weight and was sleeping poorly. She often woke in the night to find him staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. When she asked what he was thinking about, he would always say nothing important and encourage her to go back to sleep. But Catherine knew better. She could see him mentally cataloging every symptom, every change in her appearance or energy level. She could see him calculating odds and timelines in his head. She could see him preparing for loss even while fighting for hope. Their children were remarkably perceptive, despite their efforts to shield them from the worst of the situation. 9-year-old George asked increasingly pointed questions about why Mummy was tired so often and why she had so many doctor appointments. 7-year-old Charlotte became unusually clingy, refusing to go to bed unless both parents tucked her in. 4-year-old Louis seemed to sense the tension in the household and became more prone to tantrums and tears. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of treatment side effects, Catherine overheard a conversation between William and George. She had gone to bed early, exhausted from hours of nausea, and William was helping George with his homework in the study. "Is Mummy going to die?" George asked suddenly, his voice matter-of-fact in the way that only children could manage. Catherine held her breath, waiting for William's response. They had agreed to be honest with the children while remaining hopeful, but she knew this was exactly the kind of direct question that William struggled with. "Mummy is sick," William said carefully. "The doctors are giving her medicine to help her get better. Sometimes the medicine makes her feel worse before she feels better, but that's normal." "But people die when they're sick sometimes," George persisted. "Tommy's grandmother died last year because she had cancer. Does Mummy have cancer?" Catherine felt tears sting her eyes. George was too young to have to worry about such things, but he was also too intelligent to be completely sheltered from reality. "Yes," William said after a long pause. "Mummy does have cancer, but it's different from Tommy's grandmother. Mummy's doctors caught it early, and they have very good treatments now. We're all going to do everything we can to help Mummy get better. What if the treatments don't work?" The question hung in the air, and Catherine could picture William struggling with how to answer. Finally, he spoke in a voice so quiet she could barely hear him. "Then, we'll love each other and take care of each other, just like we do now. But let's not worry about things that might not happen. Let's focus on helping Mummy get through her treatments and getting better." Catherine buried her face in her pillow, overwhelmed by the conversation she had just overheard. William was doing his best to balance honesty with hope, but she could hear the fear in his voice. He was already preparing George for the possibility of loss, even while encouraging him to remain optimistic. The next morning, Catherine brought up the conversation with William while the children were at school. "I heard you talking to George last night," she said as they sat in their morning room with coffee and newspapers. William tensed slightly. "I thought you were sleeping." "I was trying to. You handled it well." "Did I?" "Because I felt like I was lying to him. But I also felt like I was scaring him. There's no right way to have that conversation." Catherine reached across the table and took his hand. "There's no perfect way to handle any of this. We're just doing the best we can." "Are we?" William asked. "Because sometimes I feel like we're just stumbling through this, making it up as we go along." "That's exactly what we're doing," Catherine agreed. "And that's okay. No one prepared us for this situation. We don't have a playbook for how a future king and queen should handle a cancer diagnosis." William squeezed her hand, but did not respond. Catherine could see that he was struggling with the loss of control that the situation represented. Throughout his life, William had been prepared for various challenges and crises. He had been trained in protocol and procedure for numerous scenarios. But no one had taught him how to potentially lose his wife while maintaining his public duties and protecting his children. As Catherine's treatment continued, they both found themselves changing in ways neither had anticipated. Catherine became more introspective, spending hours writing in a journal and reflecting on her life and priorities. She found herself less interested in some of the social obligations that had once felt important, and more focused on simple moments with her family. William, meanwhile, became more protective and controlling. He insisted on accompanying her to more appointments, despite the logistical challenges this created. He questioned every medical decision and sought multiple opinions on every aspect of her treatment. He micromanaged her diet, her sleep schedule, and her activity level. The increased attention from William was both touching and suffocating. Catherine appreciated his devotion, but she also felt like she was losing her autonomy. Every decision about her life and health became a joint decision, and sometimes she felt more like a patient than a person. One afternoon, after William had rearranged her schedule without consulting her, Catherine finally confronted him about his behavior. "I need you to stop managing my life," she said as they sat in the garden while the children played nearby. "I'm not managing your life. I'm trying to take care of you. There's a difference between taking care of me and controlling me. I'm still capable of making my own decisions." William's jaw tightened. "Your decisions affect all of us now. If you overexert yourself and end up in the hospital, that affects me and the children too. I understand that. But I also need to feel like I still have some agency in my own life. I need to feel like I'm still me, not just a cancer patient who needs to be managed. The conversation highlighted the fundamental tension they were both feeling. How much should Catherine's illness change their normal dynamic? How much independence should she maintain? And how much care should she accept? How do you balance a desire to live normally with the reality of a serious health crisis? They were still learning how to navigate these questions, and they often got it wrong. There were days when William was overprotective and Catherine felt smothered. There were other days when Catherine pushed herself too hard, and William felt helpless and frustrated. Through it all, they were both acutely aware that time might be limited. This awareness added urgency to every conversation and weight to every moment. They found themselves having discussions about things they had never needed to discuss before: what Catherine wanted for the children's education, how she hoped family traditions would be maintained, what she wanted William to know about her feelings and fears. These conversations were both necessary and heartbreaking. They were planning for a future that might not include Catherine, while simultaneously fighting for a future that would. The contradiction was emotionally exhausting for both of them. Late one evening, after the children were asleep, Catherine found William in his study staring at a photograph of their wedding day. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him remember happier times. "Regrets?" she asked softly. William looked up, startled from his reverie. "What? Are you thinking about regrets? Things you wish we had done differently?" William set down the photograph and considered her question. "No regrets about us," he said finally. "But I keep thinking about all the time we wasted on things that didn't matter. All the hours I spent in meetings that accomplished nothing. All the weekends we spent apart because of obligations. All the conversations we put off because we thought we had forever." Catherine entered the room and sat in the chair across from his desk. "We couldn't have known. I know that logically. But emotionally, I feel like I should have treasured every moment more. I should have paid better attention." "You can't live your whole life as if it's ending," Catherine pointed out. "That's not living at all. But maybe we could have lived more intentionally. Maybe we could have made different choices about how we spend our time and energy." Catherine understood what he meant. The diagnosis had clarified their priorities in ways that were both helpful and painful. Suddenly, many of the things that had once seemed important felt trivial, while simple moments together felt precious. "We still have time," she said, though even as she spoke the words, she was not sure how much time they had. "Do we?" William asked. "Because some days it feels like we're already saying goodbye, even though you're still here." His observation was painfully accurate. They were both already grieving in small ways, already adjusting to the possibility of loss. The process was gradual and subtle, but it was definitely happening. They were learning to love each other while simultaneously preparing to let go, and the contradiction was tearing them both apart. As Catherine looked at her husband across the desk, she realized that their silent goodbye had already begun. It was not happening in dramatic moments or tearful speeches, but in quiet conversations like this one, where they acknowledged the fragility of their time together and the uncertainty of their future. The weight of unspoken words continued to grow between them, and Catherine wondered how many more conversations like this they would have before one of them found the courage to say what they were both thinking. The goodbye was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. And with each passing day, they were both learning that saying goodbye was not a single moment, but a process that could take months or even years to unfold completely. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that seemed to settle permanently in the walls of Adelaide Cottage. Catherine found herself constantly chilled, despite the heating being turned up and warm blankets always within reach. The chemotherapy had made her more sensitive to temperature changes, and she often sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea that had long gone cold, forgotten in her hands as she stared into the flames. Christmas preparations began in November, earlier than usual. Catherine insisted on maintaining their family traditions, but she approached them with an urgency that William found both touching and heartbreaking. She spent hours teaching Charlotte how to make the special biscuits that had been passed down through Catherine's family, her thin hands guiding her daughter's smaller ones through the familiar motions. "Why are we learning this now, Mummy?" Charlotte asked as they rolled out the dough together. "You always make them yourself." Catherine paused in her work, choosing her words carefully. "Because it's important that you know how to make them too. These biscuits are part of our family story, and someday you might want to make them for your own children." Charlotte accepted this explanation with the easy trust of childhood, but William, watching from the doorway, understood the deeper meaning behind Catherine's words. She was creating memories and passing on traditions with a deliberation that spoke of someone who was not sure how many more Christmases she would have. The Christmas card photo session was particularly difficult that year. The photographer, who had worked with the family for several years, was shocked by Catherine's appearance. Though she wore makeup and had styled her remaining hair carefully, she looked fragile in a way that could not be completely disguised. William insisted on multiple retakes, hoping to capture an image that looked more like the Catherine the public remembered. Perhaps we could use a photo from last year, the photographer suggested gently after the fifth attempt to get the lighting right. No, Catherine said firmly. We use a current photo. Our family looks different this year, and that's okay. When the final image was selected, it showed a family that was clearly facing challenges. Catherine's smile was genuine, but, tired, William's protective posture was more pronounced than usual, and even the children seemed more subdued than in previous years. But there was also love evident in every glance and touch, a closeness born of facing adversity together. The public release of the Christmas card sparked immediate speculation about Catherine's health. Royal correspondents analyzed every detail of the photograph, commenting on her weight loss and pale complexion. The palace's response was measured but firm. The Princess of Wales was receiving treatment for a private medical matter and appreciated the public's understanding and support. But, away from public scrutiny, the family was struggling with increasingly difficult realities. Catherine's energy levels had dropped significantly by December, and she was having trouble keeping up with even basic daily activities. Some mornings she could not get out of bed until late afternoon, leaving William to handle the children's routines alone. The children's reactions to their mother's declining health varied with their personalities and ages. George, as the eldest, tried to take on additional responsibilities, helping with his younger siblings and asking less of his parents. Catherine noticed him watching her carefully, as if trying to memorize her face. It broke her heart to see her 9-year-old son carrying such worry. Charlotte became more openly emotional, crying easily and seeking constant physical comfort from both parents. She wanted to sleep in their bed most nights, curled up between Catherine and William as if her presence could somehow protect their family from further harm. Louis, still very young, did not fully understand what was happening, but he sensed the change in atmosphere. He became more clingy with Catherine, refusing to let her out of his sight when she was feeling well enough to spend time with them. His innocent questions were often the most heartbreaking. "Mummy, why do you sleep so much?" he asked one afternoon as Catherine tried to rest on the sofa while he played nearby. "The medicine I take makes me very tired, sweetheart," Catherine explained, pulling him up onto the cushion beside her. "When will you stop taking the medicine?" It was such a simple question, but Catherine found herself unable to answer it honestly. The truth was that she did not know when, or if, she would be able to stop treatment. The latest scans had shown mixed results, some improvement in certain areas, but concerning developments in others. "I don't know yet," she said finally. "The doctors need to see how well the medicine is working before they can tell us." Louis seemed satisfied with this answer and snuggled closer to her. Catherine closed her eyes and tried to memorize the weight of his small body against hers, the smell of his hair, the sound of his breathing. These moments felt increasingly precious and finite. William's struggle was different, but equally profound. He was trying to maintain his public duties while being present for his family, and the strain was showing. His staff noticed that he seemed distracted during meetings and was more short-tempered than usual. He had lost weight and was clearly not sleeping well. One evening in mid-December, Catherine's sister Pippa visited for dinner. After the children went to bed, the three adults sat in the living room with wine and tried to have a normal conversation about holiday plans and family news. But the elephant in the room was impossible to ignore. "How are you really doing?" Pippa asked Catherine during a lull in the conversation. Catherine glanced at William before answering. They had been having this conversation with family and friends frequently lately, and she was tired of trying to find the right balance between honesty and reassurance. "Some days are better than others," Catherine said simply. "Today was a good day. I was able to have breakfast with the children and take a walk in the garden. Yesterday, I barely got out of bed." "And the prognosis?" "Uncertain," William answered when Catherine hesitated. "The doctors are pleased with some aspects of the treatment response, but concerned about others. We're taking it one day at a time." Pippa nodded, but Catherine could see the fear in her sister's eyes. They had always been close, and Pippa was one of the few people who saw Catherine without any royal protocol or public facade. She could see the truth that William and the children might not be ready to acknowledge. After Pippa left, William and Catherine found themselves having one of their increasingly frequent difficult conversations. They had learned to speak in code about some topics, as if using euphemisms could somehow make the reality less harsh. "I think we need to start having some practical discussions," Catherine said as they prepared for bed. "What kind of practical discussions?" "About the children. About your future. About what happens if." "If what?" William asked, though they both knew what she meant. "If the treatment doesn't work." William sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion and defeat. "I can't have that conversation yet. We need to have it eventually. There are decisions that need to be made, arrangements that should be put in place." "Not yet," William said firmly. "We don't give up hope yet." Catherine sat beside him and took his hand. "I'm not giving up hope. But hope doesn't mean we can't also be prepared. I need to know that you and the children will be okay, whatever happens. We won't be okay without you." The simple statement hung between them, heavy with truth and pain. Catherine squeezed his hand, but did not contradict him. They both knew that their family would be fundamentally changed if she died, that the children would grow up differently, that William would have to navigate his future role as king without the partner he had counted on. "You'll learn to be okay," Catherine said gently. "It will take time, and it will be different, but you'll learn. The children will learn too. People are more resilient than they think they are." "I don't want to be resilient," William said, his voice breaking slightly. "I want my wife. I know. I want to be here too. I want to see George become king someday. I want to dance at Charlotte's wedding. I want to spoil Louis's children. I want all of that, and I'm fighting for it. But I also need to know that if I can't have those things, the people I love most in the world will still have good lives." It was perhaps the most direct they had been about the possibility of Catherine's death since the diagnosis. The conversation was painful but necessary, and Catherine felt some relief at finally voicing her fears and concerns. Over the following days, they began to have the practical conversations Catherine had requested. They talked about the children's education, about maintaining family traditions, about how William might eventually find happiness again. These discussions were conducted in fragments, usually late at night after the children were asleep, and always with the understanding that they were planning for a possibility they both desperately hoped to avoid. Catherine also began making private arrangements. She met with lawyers to update her will and create trust funds for the children. She recorded video messages for birthdays and graduations she might miss. She wrote letters to William and each of the children to be given to them at appropriate times in the future. These activities were emotionally exhausting, but Catherine found them oddly comforting as well. Taking practical steps to prepare for her potential death gave her some sense of control over an essentially uncontrollable situation. She was ensuring that her love and guidance would reach her family even if she could not be physically present to provide them. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold, but the house was filled with the familiar chaos of children opening presents and the smell of a traditional breakfast cooking. Catherine had managed to wrap all the gifts herself, staying up late on good days to complete the task. She was determined that this Christmas would feel as normal as possible for her children. She was exhausted by midday, but refused to rest while the family was together. They played board games and watched holiday films, and Catherine tried to imprint every detail of the day in her memory. William kept glancing at her with concern, but she shook her head whenever he suggested she might want to lie down. That evening, after the children were finally asleep, William and Catherine sat by the tree with the last of the wine from dinner. The house was quiet except for the gentle crackling of the fire, and colored lights from the tree cast a warm glow over the room. "This was a good day," Catherine said, curled up against William on the sofa. "It was," he agreed, though she could hear the sadness in his voice. "Whatever happens next year, they'll remember this Christmas. They'll remember that we were all together, and that it felt normal and happy." William's arm tightened around her. "There will be other Christmases." "I hope so," Catherine said quietly. "But if there aren't, this was a good one to remember." They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Catherine was thinking about all the Christmases they had shared as a family, and all the ones she might miss. William was trying not to think about the possibility of next Christmas without her. In the weeks following Christmas, Catherine's condition continued to fluctuate. Some days brought hope as she felt stronger and more energetic. Other days brought setbacks that reminded them both how precarious her situation remained. The uncertainty was perhaps the most difficult aspect of their ordeal, the inability to plan for the future because they did not know what that future might hold. But, through it all, they continued their silent goodbye. It was not a single conversation or dramatic moment, but an ongoing process of preparation and acceptance. They were learning to love each other fully while simultaneously preparing to let go, and the contradiction was both beautiful and heartbreaking. As winter deepened and the new year approached, both William and Catherine understood that they were living in borrowed time. Whether that time would be measured in months or years remained unknown, but they were both determined to use whatever time they had as wisely and lovingly as possible. The hardest part was maintaining hope while also facing reality. They had to believe that Catherine might recover completely while also preparing for the possibility that she might not. It was an impossible balance, but it was the only way they could continue to function as individuals and as a family. Their goodbye was happening slowly, in pieces, through conversations and silences, through practical preparations and emotional reckonings. And, while neither of them was ready for it to be over, they were both learning that sometimes saying goodbye is not about endings, but about loving someone enough to let them go when the time comes, even when that time comes too soon. The hospital room was painted a pale yellow that was supposed to be cheerful, but somehow managed to feel artificial under the harsh fluorescent lighting. Catherine had been admitted for observation after experiencing complications from her latest round of treatment. What was meant to be a short overnight stay had stretched into 5 days, and the walls felt like they were closing in around her. William sat in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, laptop balanced on his knees, as he tried to work through correspondence from his private office. He had barely left her side since the admission, sleeping in the chair and taking meetings via phone when absolutely necessary. Dark circles under his eyes spoke to the exhaustion he was trying to hide. "You should go home," Catherine said, watching him squint at the screen. "The children need to see you, and you need real sleep." "I'm fine here," William replied without looking up from his laptop. "You're not fine anywhere these days," Catherine observed gently. William finally looked at her, and she saw the truth he had been trying to conceal. He was not just tired, he was terrified. The complications from her treatment had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. For 3 days, the doctors had been uncertain about her condition, using words like concerning and monitoring closely that had sent William into barely controlled panic. "I don't want to miss anything," he admitted. "I don't want to be at home when—" He could not finish the sentence, but Catherine understood. William was afraid that if he left, she might take a turn for the worse in his absence. He was afraid that their goodbye might happen without him being present. "The doctors said I'm stable now," Catherine reminded him. "My blood pressure is back to normal, and the nausea has improved significantly. The doctors also said the treatment was going well 2 weeks ago, before this happened." Catherine could not argue with that logic. Her illness had been full of unexpected turns and setbacks that had caught everyone off guard. Just when they thought they understood her condition and prognosis, something would change, requiring new approaches and adjusted expectations. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Catherine's oncologist, entered with a tablet in her hands and the measured expression that Catherine had learned to read like a book. Good news brought smiles and relaxed posture. Neutral updates brought professional courtesy. Bad news brought the careful, composed mask that Dr. Mitchell wore now. "Good morning," Dr. Mitchell said, pulling up a second chair so she could sit at eye level with both of them. "How are you feeling today, Catherine?" "Better than yesterday. The nausea is much more manageable, and I actually slept through the night." "That's good to hear. Your latest blood work shows improvement in several areas." Dr. Mitchell scrolled through information on her tablet. "Your white blood cell count is responding well, and we're seeing better kidney function than we were 3 days ago." William leaned forward slightly. "What about the complications? Are we past the worst of it?" "The immediate crisis has passed," Dr. Mitchell said carefully. "But we need to have a discussion about moving forward with treatment." Catherine felt her stomach drop, though whether from anxiety or lingering medication effects, she could not tell. "What kind of discussion?" Dr. Mitchell set down her tablet and looked directly at Catherine. "The complications you experienced were more severe than we typically see with this treatment protocol. Your body's response suggests that continuing with the current chemotherapy regimen might cause more harm than benefit." The room seemed to grow very quiet. Catherine could hear the sound of her own heartbeat and the distant beeping of monitors from other rooms. William had gone completely still beside her. "What are our alternatives?" William asked, his voice carefully controlled. We have several options to discuss, Dr. Mitchell replied. We could try a different chemotherapy combination with potentially fewer side effects, though it might also be less aggressive against the cancer cells. We could explore radiation therapy as an alternative or supplement. Or, she paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase the next option. Or, Catherine prompted. Or we could shift our focus from aggressive treatment to comfort care and quality of life. The euphemism hung in the air between them. Comfort care meant palliative care. It meant accepting that the cancer could not be cured and focusing instead on managing symptoms and pain. It meant preparing for death rather than fighting for life. What would you recommend? William asked, though Catherine could hear the effort it took him to voice the question. That's not a decision I can make for you, Dr. Mitchell said. But I can give you information to help you decide. The scans show that while some areas have responded to treatment, others have continued to progress. The cancer is more aggressive than we initially hoped, and your body's tolerance for treatment is lower than we expected. How much time are we talking about? Catherine asked. She appreciated that William was trying to handle the medical discussions, but she needed to hear the information directly. That's difficult to predict with certainty. If we continue with aggressive treatment, and your body tolerates it better than recent experience suggests, we might have several months to a year to work with. If we shift to comfort care, the timeline would likely be shorter, but your quality of life during that time would probably be better. How much shorter? Catherine pressed. Dr. Mitchell hesitated. Weeks to months, rather than months to years. The stark simplicity of the timeline hit Catherine like a physical blow. Weeks to months. Not long enough to see George finish primary school. Not long enough for Charlotte to lose her first tooth. Not long enough for Louis to start reading on his own. William reached for her hand, and Catherine realized she was trembling. The abstract concept of dying had suddenly become very concrete and immediate. This was not a distant possibility to prepare for. This was a reality that was approaching rapidly. We need time to think, William said. Of course. Take all the time you need. We can schedule another meeting later this week to discuss your decision. After Dr. Mitchell left, Catherine and William sat in silence for a long time. The weight of the information they had just received seemed to fill the room, making it difficult to breathe or think clearly. Weeks to months, Catherine said finally. If we choose comfort care, William said quickly. If we continue treatment, the timeline is completely different. But the treatment might kill me faster than the cancer would. Or it might give us more time. Catherine turned to look at her husband directly. What do you think we should do? William was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the decision. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want to fight. I want to try everything possible. I'm not ready to give up, even if fighting means I'm sick and miserable for whatever time we have left. Even then. Because there's a chance, however small, that the fight might work. There's a chance we might get years instead of months. Catherine understood his position, but she also found herself considering the alternative. The idea of spending her remaining time feeling well enough to enjoy her children, to have meaningful conversations, to create final memories without the fog of chemotherapy was appealing. I need to think about what kind of death I want, she said. The word death seemed to shock William. They had been dancing around it for months, using euphemisms and avoiding direct acknowledgement. But Catherine was finding that she needed to say it aloud, to make it real so she could face it properly. I don't want to talk about death. I want to talk about treatment options and fighting and hope. We can talk about those things too. But I also need to talk about death because it's probably going to happen, and I want some control over how it happens. William stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her. Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders and knew that he was struggling not to break down completely. I can't lose you, he said without turning around. You're going to lose me, Catherine replied gently. The only question is when and how. I want to choose the how. When William turned back to face her, there were tears in his eyes that he was not trying to hide anymore. How do I raise our children without you? How do I be king without you beside me? How do I live the rest of my life knowing that the best part of it is over? Catherine felt her own tears starting. These were the questions that had been haunting both of them for months, but hearing William voice them so directly was devastating. You'll find a way, she said. You're stronger than you think, and you'll have help. Our families, your staff, the people who love us will help you figure it out. I don't want to figure it out. I want you to be there. I want to be there too. But wanting something doesn't make it possible. They cried together then, finally, allowing themselves to fully acknowledge what they had been avoiding. Catherine was going to die, probably soon, and They needed to start preparing for that reality instead of fighting against it. Later that afternoon, Catherine's parents arrived for a visit. Michael and Carol Middleton had been frequent visitors since the diagnosis, but Catherine could see that this visit felt different to them. There was a solemnity in their manner that suggested William had shared the morning's news with them. "How are you feeling, darling?" Carol asked, settling into the chair William had vacated. "Physically, much better than a few days ago. Emotionally, overwhelmed." Michael pulled up another chair. "William told us about the conversation with Dr. Mitchell. That's a lot to process." "We don't know what to decide," Catherine admitted. "Part of me wants to keep fighting, to try anything that might give us more time. But part of me wants to focus on making the time we have left as good as possible." "What does your heart tell you?" Carol asked. Catherine considered the question carefully. "My heart tells me that I want to see my children grow up. I want to grow old with William. I want to be a grandmother someday. But my heart also tells me that I want to be present and engaged for whatever time I have left, not sick and struggling through treatments that might not work anyway." "There's no wrong choice," Michael said. "Whatever you and William decide, we'll support you completely." "What would you choose?" Catherine asked. "If you were in my position, what would you do?" Her parents exchanged a long look before Carol answered. "I think we would probably choose quality over quantity. But we're not in your position, and we don't have young children depending on us. Your situation is more complicated than ours would be." The conversation continued for another hour, covering practical matters and emotional concerns in equal measure. Catherine found it helpful to talk through her thoughts with people who had known her longest and loved her unconditionally. That evening, after her parents had left and visiting hours were over, Catherine and William had their most honest conversation yet about the choices ahead of them. "I keep thinking about the children," Catherine said. "If I continue treatment and spend the next few months sick and weak, what kind of memories am I leaving them with? But if I stop treatment and focus on comfort care, am I giving up too easily? Am I abandoning my responsibility to fight for them?" "I don't think there's a right answer," William admitted. "Either choice involves sacrifice and loss." "I think I want to stop the aggressive treatments," Catherine said quietly. "I think I want to focus on being as present as possible for whatever time we have." William was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "If that's what you want, then that's what we'll do. But I need you to know that this is the hardest thing I've ever had to accept." "It's the hardest thing I've ever had to choose," Catherine replied. They held hands in the dim hospital room, both understanding that they had just made a decision that would fundamentally change their remaining time together. The fight was over, but the goodbye was just beginning. In the days that followed, as they shared their decision with family and close friends, Catherine felt a strange sense of relief mixed with profound sadness. The uncertainty was over, but so was hope for a different ending to their story. Their silent goodbye was no longer silent. They had acknowledged what was coming, and now they could begin the process of preparing for it together. The farewell would take weeks or months, conducted in ordinary moments and extraordinary conversations, but at least they would face it honestly and together. As Catherine prepared to leave the hospital and return home, she realized that this phase of their goodbye would be different from what had come before. Now they knew they were saying goodbye, and that knowledge would color every interaction, every conversation, every moment they shared. The challenge would be learning how to live fully while preparing to die, how to create joy while acknowledging sorrow, and how to love completely while practicing letting go. It was an impossible balance, but it was the only path forward they had. Spring arrived early at Adelaide Cottage, bringing with it an almost cruel beauty that highlighted the contrast between the renewal happening in their garden and the ending approaching within their home. Catherine spent most of her mornings in the conservatory, wrapped in soft blankets, and watching the daffodils push through the soil with a determination she envied. The decision to focus on comfort care had transformed their daily routine in ways both subtle and profound. Without the exhausting schedule of treatments, Catherine had more energy for the activities that mattered most to her. She was able to read bedtime stories to the children again, help with homework, and engage in the small domestic moments that she had missed during the worst of her treatment. But the improvement was temporary and fragile. Dr. Mitchell visited weekly now, monitoring Catherine's comfort rather than fighting her disease. The conversations had shifted from treatment protocols to pain management and quality of life measures. It was a gentler approach, but one that came with the constant reminder of why it was necessary. William had taken extended leave from most of his official duties, a decision that had required careful coordination with the palace and explanations to the press. The public statement had been deliberately vague, mentioning family obligations and a desire to spend time with the children during school holidays. Only a very small circle of people knew the truth about Catherine's prognosis. On a particularly warm day in March, Catherine asked William to help her walk to the small pond at the edge of their property. It was a longer walk than she had attempted in weeks, but something about the spring sunshine made her want to push her limits. "Are you sure you're up for this?" William asked as he helped her put on a light jacket. "Probably not," Catherine admitted with a smile that still held echoes of her former vitality. "But I want to try." They walked slowly, William's arm steady around her waist, stopping frequently for Catherine to rest. The children had gone to visit their grandparents for the afternoon, giving William and Catherine a rare opportunity to be alone together without the constant awareness of young eyes watching their every interaction. The pond was exactly as Catherine remembered it from healthier days. Lily pads floated on the surface, and a family of ducks had taken up residence along the far shore. She had often brought the children here during summer afternoons, watching them feed bread to the ducks and search for interesting stones along the water's edge. "Do you remember when Lewis fell in last summer?" Catherine asked as they settled onto the wooden bench beside the water. "He was so proud of himself for getting completely soaked," William recalled. "Most children would have been upset, but he thought it was the greatest adventure." "He's going to be okay," Catherine said suddenly. "He's young enough that he'll adapt." Children are resilient in ways that adults aren't. William understood that she was not just talking about Lewis's personality, but about his ability to cope with losing his mother at such a young age. It was a conversation they had been having in fragments for weeks, trying to understand how each of their children would process her death and what kind of support they would need. "George is the one I worry about most," Catherine continued. "He's old enough to understand what's happening, but not old enough to have developed healthy coping mechanisms. He's going to blame himself somehow, or think he should have been able to prevent it. We'll make sure he gets help. Counseling, therapy, whatever he needs. And Charlotte needs to know that it's okay to be angry with me for leaving. She's going to feel abandoned, and she needs permission to feel those feelings without guilt." These conversations about their children's future emotional health were among the most difficult they had. Catherine was trying to mother her children beyond her own death, to anticipate their needs and provide guidance for situations she would not be present to navigate. "I keep thinking about their weddings," Catherine said, watching the ducks glide across the water. "How do we make sure they feel my presence during those moments? How do we make sure they know how proud I would have been?" "We'll find ways," William said, though his voice betrayed his own uncertainty about how to accomplish such a thing. "I want to record videos for them. For birthdays, graduations, their wedding days. I want them to have something more than just memories of me being sick. We can arrange that. We can set up a private studio at the house, make it as comfortable as possible for you." Catherine leaned against William's shoulder, grateful for his immediate support of the idea. The video recordings would be emotionally difficult to make, but she knew they would be precious gifts for her children in the years to come. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The spring air was soft and warm, and Catherine found herself thinking about all the seasons she would miss. She would not see this pond in summer, when the water lilies bloomed. She would not see the autumn colors reflected in its surface. She would not see it frozen during the next winter. "I'm not afraid of dying," Catherine said suddenly. "But I'm terrified of being forgotten." "You will never be forgotten," William said fiercely. "The children will make sure of that. I will make sure of that. Your memory will be preserved and honored for generations." "I don't mean public memory," Catherine clarified. "I mean personal memory. I'm afraid that Charlotte won't remember the way I used to sing to her when she had nightmares. I'm afraid that Lewis won't remember how we used to dance in the kitchen while dinner was cooking. I'm afraid that George won't remember our conversations about becoming king someday." William turned to look at her directly. "Then, we need to make sure those memories are recorded somehow. Stories, photographs, videos. We need to create a record of who you were as their mother, not just as a public figure. Will you help me do that?" "Of course. Whatever you need." That afternoon marked the beginning of what Catherine privately thought of as her memory project. Over the following weeks, she worked with William and a small team of trusted staff to create a comprehensive record of her life as wife and mother. They recorded hours of video messages, compiled photo albums with detailed captions explaining the context of each image, and wrote down family stories that might otherwise be lost. Catherine also spent time with each child individually, creating special memories and having age-appropriate conversations about what would happen after she was gone. With George, she talked about the responsibilities he would inherit and how proud she was of the young man he was becoming. With Charlotte, she shared mother-daughter traditions and made plans for special rituals that William could help maintain. With Louis, she focused on play and affection, trying to give him as much maternal love as possible while he was still young enough to accept it without reservation. These individual sessions with the children were both heartbreaking and beautiful. Catherine was amazed by their resilience and their ability to live fully in the present while also accepting the reality of their changing future. They asked direct questions about death and heaven, cried when they felt sad, and then moved on to normal childhood concerns about schoolwork and friendships. "Mummy, will you still be able to see us after you go to heaven?" Charlotte asked one afternoon as they painted together in Catherine's study. "I don't know exactly how it works," Catherine answered honestly. "But I believe that love doesn't end when someone dies. I think I'll always be connected to you in ways that we might not be able to see or understand. Will you miss us? I think I'll be too happy watching you grow into the amazing woman I know you're going to become to feel sad about it." Charlotte seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her painting. Catherine marveled at her daughter's ability to accept such complex concepts with the straightforward trust of childhood. As April progressed, Catherine's energy levels began to decline noticeably. The good days became fewer and shorter, and she found herself sleeping more and eating less. Dr. Mitchell increased her pain medication and arranged for additional support services to help with her care at home. William became her primary caregiver, learning to manage medications, monitor symptoms, and provide physical support when she needed it. He approached these tasks with the same methodical dedication he brought to his royal duties, but Catherine could see the emotional toll it was taking on him. One evening, as he helped her get ready for bed, Catherine noticed how thin he had become. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were gray streaks in his hair that she was certain had not been there 6 months earlier. "You need to take better care of yourself," she said as he helped her into her nightgown. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausting yourself trying to take care of everyone else. When I'm gone, the children are going to need you to be healthy and strong." William paused in the act of turning down the bed covers. "Can we not talk about when you're gone tonight? Can we just be here together right now?" Catherine understood his need to sometimes avoid the reality of their situation. The constant awareness of her approaching death was emotionally exhausting for both of them. Sometimes they needed to simply exist as husband and wife without the weight of impending loss hanging over every interaction. "What would you like to talk about instead?" she asked, settling into bed. "Tell me about your favorite day," William said, lying down beside her. "Not our wedding day or when the children were born, but just an ordinary day that made you happy." Catherine thought for a moment, then smiled. "Do you remember that Sunday last summer when we decided not to go to church because it was too beautiful to stay inside? We had breakfast in the garden and spent the whole day in our pajamas. George built that elaborate fort out of couch cushions and insisted that we all had to follow his rules for entering it. Charlotte made up a song about butterflies and performed it at least 10 times. Louis discovered that he could make the sprinkler turn on and off and thought he had magical powers. You made that enormous picnic lunch, and we ate it sitting on a blanket under the oak tree. And you fell asleep reading the Sunday papers while the children used you as a jungle gym." William smiled at the memory. "It was perfect because it was so completely normal. Those are the days I want them to remember," Catherine said. "Not the formal occasions or the official events, but the lazy Sunday afternoons when we were just a family." As Catherine's condition continued to deteriorate through April and into May, their conversations increasingly focused on preserving and honoring the simple moments they had shared as a family. They looked through photo albums together, remembering holidays and birthdays and ordinary days that had taken on special significance in retrospect. The palace had begun making discreet preparations for Catherine's death, though these arrangements were kept strictly confidential. Plans were developed for the children's care during the immediate aftermath, for media management, and for the eventual funeral arrangements. Catherine was consulted on some decisions, but preferred to leave most of the planning to William and his staff. Her primary focus was on her family and the relationships she would soon have to leave behind. She spent as much time as possible with her parents and siblings, creating final memories and expressing gratitude for their support throughout her illness. She also reached out to friends and extended family members, writing letters and having phone conversations that served as personal goodbyes. One afternoon in late May, as Catherine rested in the conservatory, she realized that she was ready. The fear and anxiety that had characterized the early months after her diagnosis had gradually given way to a sense of peace and acceptance. She had said what needed to be said, recorded what needed to be preserved, and loved as fully as possible in the time she had been given. That evening, she asked William to sit with her as she watched the sunset through the large windows of their bedroom. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the garden below was lush with late spring blooms. "It's time," she said quietly. William understood immediately what she meant. Her condition had been declining steadily for the past week, and they both knew that she had very little time left. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "No," Catherine answered truthfully. "I'm sad to leave you and the children, but I'm not afraid. I'm ready." "I'm not ready," William admitted. "You don't have to be ready to let me go," Catherine said, taking his hand. "But you do have to be ready to keep living, for the children's sake and for your own." They talked quietly as the light faded, sharing memories and expressing love that had grown deeper and stronger through the trials of the past year. Catherine fell asleep holding William's hand, and when she woke briefly during the night, she felt surrounded by peace and love. She died quietly 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning in late May, with William beside her and sunlight streaming through the windows of their bedroom. The children were at school, spared from witnessing her final moments, but close enough to say their goodbyes when they returned home that afternoon. Catherine's death was peaceful and dignified, surrounded by the love and comfort she had hoped for. Her goodbye to William and their children had been a long, gradual process of preparation and acceptance, conducted over months of honest conversations and meaningful moments. The silence that had characterized so much of their farewell was finally broken by William's tears and the children's questions, but it was replaced by a different kind of silence. The quiet that comes after a long struggle has ended, and love has been fully expressed and received. Catherine's legacy lived on in the videos she had recorded, the letters she had written, and the memories she had helped create during her final months. But, most importantly, it lived on in the strength and love of the family she had prepared so carefully to continue without her, knowing that while their goodbye had been heartbreaking, it had also been complete.